Hi, everyone. I'm McKenna Jordan. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And I'm really excited today to be joined by Lars Kepler and Carter Wilson for one of our afternoon international events. We always do these in the afternoon because of the time difference, but it's a fun treat for me not to be doing it late in the evening. So I think we're going to have a great conversation. As always, I've spoken with Alexandra and Alexandra several times about their books, and they're always a delight. And today my job is easy because, as I said, Carter Wilson is going to be our guest moderator, and I'm sure he'll do a wonderful job as well. As always, if you'd like more information about the books or to find out more information about the authors on our event, I've put a link in the comments on Facebook and the live chat on YouTube. You can find that information there. And if you're inclined to order books, you can also do that through us. We would greatly appreciate it. If you have any questions for any of the participants today, don't be shy. Put them in, again, the comments on Facebook or the live chat on YouTube, and we'll get to them in about 30 minutes once their conversation is wrapping up. I think that's all for today. It's January. We are doing some events in store again, which has been nice and a little bit scary, but we're still obviously continuing with these virtual events. So to our regular virtual event viewers, it's good to see you. Thanks for being on here, and I hope you're well. All right, so without more delay, let me bring on the stars of the show. Lars Kepler, how are you two today?
Good.
Just fine.
Yeah.
Everything is fine,
And you?
actually. Are you
We are
in Stockholm. The light is coming back. It has been a very dark winter, and well, I know you are in another place, but here in the north of the earth, has been really dark and cold.
A lot of snow,
But now we can sense a new,
a feeling of spring.
yeah.
That's great. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So I'm going to do your official bio really quickly, and then we'll bring Carter on. Lars Kepler is the pseudonym of the critically acclaimed husband and wife team Alexandra and Alexander Ahndoril. Their #1 internationally best-selling Killer Instinct series has sold more than 15 million copies in 40 languages. The Ahndorils were both established writers before they adopted the pen name Lars Kepler and have each published several acclaimed novels. They live in Stockholm, Sweden, and their books are translated by Alice Menzies. And you're here today to talk about your brand new book, The Mirror Man. And as you know, and many of the people who watch these events know, I'm a big fan of this series. So is Sally at the store. So I'm looking forward to this discussion, and congrats on another excellent book. We also have Carter Wilson here with us. Hi, Carter. How are you?
Hello, I'm well. How are you?
I'm well. I always joke that my favorite person on one of these events is the guest moderator because it makes my life easy. So thank you for being here.
Oh, I could screw it up, and then you'd have to jump in.
Anything's possible, but I have confidence. Like we were saying beforehand, your setup makes me think that everything is going to go smoothly.
Let's hope so.
All right, so Carter Wilson is the USA Today and #1 Denver Post best-selling author of multiple critically acclaimed standalone psychological thrillers. He's an ITW Thriller Award finalist, a 4-time winner of the Colorado Book Award, and his novels have received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and Library Journal. Carter lives outside of Boulder, Colorado, and I believe your new book is coming in April called The New Neighbor, and maybe if we're lucky, we'll hear a little bit about that later too.
Great.
Okay, I think we are all set. I'm going to go away. I'm going to leave you two to chat, and I'll be back on in about 30 minutes. Just call me when you're ready for me.
Sounds good. Lars Kepler, Alexander and Alexandra. I'm so thrilled that you let me be a part of your world for this. So congratulations on the release. Alexandra, I'll start with you. You've had multiple books released. Does it feel different? Every time you have a release, is it feel the same, or is it the same level of excitement, or is it kind of, I've done this before?
Well, it's the same. It's totally the same.
It's the same pressure, actually.
Because each book is your, vulnerable child. It's a cliche, but the book, you give all your heart to each book, and it's the same.
Yeah.
We just want them to
Yeah, be fine, be safe.
Yeah.
Find somebody who loves
Have a
them.
good journey.
Yeah.
You spend all this time and then it's just in the wild and you
Yeah.
can't do anything. You just have to let it exist, which is a great thing for authors to learn, is how to let go. And it's not always easy to do, is it?
But it hurts anyway.
So I interview a lot of authors on my podcast, but this is the first time I've talked to a husband and wife team. So yeah, I'm interested kind of in the origin story of Lars Kepler a little bit. And I know you each individually had tremendous writing accomplishments before you started writing together. But first off, how long have you been married and how long have you been writing as a team?
Oh, great question. Let me see. We met, we are so old. We met in 1992 when I moved to Stockholm. I was an actress back then, and I was accepted at a very prestigious theater school.
The Royal Dramatic.
Yeah, the Royal School of Dramatic Art in Stockholm. So I moved here, and I went to a party immediately where I met Alexandra. And he started to tell me, it's much better to be a writer.
Like you have to take control over your own creativity. You know,
Yeah.
you were complaining about directors.
Yeah, so when you write, you are kind of the director and the actor at the same time. But Alexander, you were a writer by then. He was kind of a wonder child, actually. Yeah,
Well, not
you
really.
were accepted as a writer when you were 18 years old.
Yeah.
It's very rare. You have to tell us that story, Alexander.
Well,
Accepted it to where?
pardon?
Yeah, he was. His manuscript was published.
I started early, so I had never written, not even a short story, when I had this idea. Let's write a novel. So I bought a typewriter and I sat down and I wrote my manuscript. And since I couldn't afford to photocopy the manuscript, I posted my original to the biggest publishing house in Sweden, and the book was accepted. So
you posted the
Amazing.
only
yeah, I was a bit
manuscript.
like, you can call it luck. But
Right, you spent all the money on the typewriter. You didn't have any
Yeah.
any money left to make Xeroxes.
But
Wow.
many years later, we decided to, when we had been married for many years and had 3 children already, we decided to, let's try to write together.
Okay. So Alexandra, then you had already had some experience writing, and Alexandra, like what was your process to say, I'm going to be a writer now? How do I do this?
Well, yeah, I was convinced by Alexander to try to write, but for me, being a writer had been such a big thing, a prestigious thing, but you convinced me, and I wrote 3 historical novels, totally different.
You even got the biggest debut prize in Sweden.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
But writing is very lonely, though. You must know that yourself. When you write, you are alone with your story, and you can't tell anyone what you're writing about, because then the magic will go away. So we really wanted to cooperate. And that is how it started, actually, the story of Lars Kepler.
But that's interesting to me, because you're right. Writing is very lonely, and I love the loneliness. I love going into that room and going into my head, and it's my world, and I don't have to share it with anyone else. So writing as a team would be very different for me. So
yes,
what's that evolution been like? Has it been to a place now where you're like, okay, we know exactly how to do this together, or is it constantly you're learning about each other through this process?
Well, if we talk about the start, we love each other very much. Right together. Well,
it was very difficult. It was much more complicated than we ever could have imagined, because, as you said, we love each other, but mixing 2 different voices together, it wasn't that easy.
No,
so we started to fight a lot.
I noticed I started to protect my own, metaphors and everything. I didn't think I had it in me, but I was like protective, and
Yeah,
so we argued a lot.
Yeah.
But finally, we came up with the idea to create a pen name, Lars Kepler, a third author,
Yeah.
and that was the key for us to write together.
Yeah, because we could suddenly leave our egos behind, and we found a common tone. We knew exactly when we came up with the idea of writing under a pen name. It was clear to us that Lars Kepler writes these books, and it's this tone, and these are the characters. So,
wow, isn't that interesting? So it was really you just needed that rebirth.
yes,
Yeah.
Just
exactly.
through the creation of a pen name where you were able to step back and say, okay, this is this universe of this person
Exactly.
that we were going to be a part of.
Together, yeah.
And actually, it's pretty common around with writers to create a new writer. You know, a lot of writers have pen names, as you know.
Yeah, I always find that fascinating, the idea of the pen name and what that allows you to do mentally, what kind of escape it allows you to have. So
it's a big difference, actually. Yeah,
I would think so. Yeah, and so you created this name and you started writing, and then things started clicking. Now, when reading your works, you tend to have multiple points of view, sometimes even within the same chapter. What do you do? Do you assign points of view to each other and say, this is who I'm going to be for this book, or how does that work?
Oh, good question. No, we share everything. We share everything from the first idea and throughout the whole process. So, and we do all the research together. I think for us, equality is very, very important. We need to know equal amount of the plot. We need to share the plot together.
You can't have one of us just knowing, forensics or police tactics. We have to know it both, because it would be possible to discuss the plot otherwise. So we have to know everything, and for us it works to share everything. We just sit side by side with one computer each, and we email text to each other like 1 meter, bling, bling, all the time, and like filling gaps, change things, and so it's like a big dough we're working on together.
Yeah, and
that's fascinating.
So we never ever start with like first chapter 1, then chapter 2. We work on the whole thing all the time.
And it is very important that Lars Kepler is one voice. So that is what we want to achieve.
Yeah.
I find, talking to a lot of other writers, it's all across the board in terms of what people's style and what they do, and certainly one of the big things is whether people outline or they write from the seat of the pants. And I don't outline. I cannot outline to say it, so I have no idea what's going to happen in this story. I know an opening scene and I take it from there. So, but does one of you tend to have the idea of like, I can see this whole story, I know start to finish what's going to happen. And is that difficult for the other person who's like, I just want to take this one chapter at a time? Or do you really, it sounds like you really kind of come together in that same concept.
I understand you.
Being an intuitive writer is very tempting.
Yeah, because you have fun all the time yourself, because you surprise yourself.
Totally.
Yeah. But since we're two writers, we always start with a detailed plot.
Yes.
So we work like 2 or 3 months just on the plot. We write every scene on small notes of paper which we put on the wall, so we can overview the story and dream up the story together. So we do that until we're sure. But then, as you said, when we start to write, the characters come alive and they don't care about the notes on the wall.
No, that's when the intuition is free in a way, because the characters, they are kind of released in the plot that in the structure of the book, and then we just follow them.
So for us, it's a balance between following the story itself and the characters, their own wishes, and to try to direct them through a story that we think is good. So
Yeah, that's
because they don't want to be killed, as you know, and they try to escape. And sometimes, sorry, but they have to.
yeah, totally. You can just feel that sometimes, like, oh, this person's got to die. It's for the greater good.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Well, you two seem to have a very healthy relationship, and you seem very well adjusted. So let's start talking about your dark and twisted novels. You know, a lot of people always ask thriller writers what happened to you as a child, but
Yeah.
most thriller writers I know are the most beautiful, generous, normal people that I've ever met. Now I had the huge pleasure of being able to read The Mirror Man before it's released. And as somebody who writes really dark fiction myself, I had to take a couple breaks every now and then because it was such a great novel, but it's intense and it's, you know, you have this intensity that serves the story so well. So it didn't feel like, you know, gratuitous by any means. But on your website, you have a quote, which I found interesting. The quote says, "These stories are a way for us to manage our own fears of people's cruelty." So I want to hear a little bit from you about the nature of that quote and how it informs how you choose to write your books, what subject matter you come up with.
Yeah, it's absolutely true that I think we write these books because we are afraid of violence. It's not because we like violence or are fascinated by violence. It's kind of we hate violence and we are scared of the cruelty that people show to each other. And
if you look at the world, just read the news, and every day it's about human cruelty, and that's scaring. So for us, fiction is actually a way to take care of our own fears.
Yeah,
it's
just like the quote you said.
Because you know, you can. Fiction is a possibility to start a journey from chaos to order, from, you know, questions to answers, injustice to justice. So it's a way to make the world right, at least in your head.
Yeah.
Right. Chaos to order is a good way of putting it, because I think good writers such as yourselves know how to throw a lot of chaos at the reader, but always have kind of a thread of hope. There's always hope there. And it never goes away completely. Sometimes there's a lot more than other times. And that's the only way you're able to breathe through some of these very intense scenes. So in your case, it's almost therapeutic, not for the reader as much as it is for you writing this. Like you need this story in order to process kind of your everyday lives, it sounds like.
And I think
you're totally right.
I think also it's very frustrating to live in a world where you never get any answers. You never understand why things happen, why people do what they do to each other. And in fiction, you can get the answers. For me, actually, that is the therapeutic thing, because also you never get confessions in real life. And also the confession is, I think we have a deep need of that as human beings to tell us, I did this because something. And as writers, we are always interested not to paint a picture of the perpetrator as a monster, but as a person that felt I had no other choice than doing this.
Yeah, it's actually about empathy. Writing and reading is about empathy. I think you have to even understand a serial killer, because it's not interesting if the serial killer is just a monster. You have to, of course, disagree with what he does, but you want to understand him anyway, and you want to understand your heroes too, of course.
You're totally right. Empathy is the key word right there. And I've always thought that, you know, the best writers are those who do have a deep well of empathy, because they're able to kind of look through the eyes of their characters and really make it relatable. And your villains, if you want to call them villains, are people who come across as not victims of their own circumstance, but it's almost like, this is my nature. I'm not doing this to be horrible on purpose. This is who I am, and I can't control that.
But that's right. They have this with them, but we also want to say somewhere you made a choice, even though because you can have a horrible childhood, but you don't have to be a serial killer. You can actually make something else of it. But so there's both what you bring, what you have with you, and what you do with it. So it's
and I think also that the villains, or what to say, they are kind of victims as well. And I think what we always try to show in our books is that our detective inspector Jonah Lena, our hero, he can actually see beyond the serial killers as monsters. He can see the desperation and the choices they feel that they had to make, and it's important for us.
I think this is a bit of a tradition, a Scandinavian tradition, actually, to see also the society in this. The society has a responsibility too. It's a failure of the whole society when you have a serial killer. Because it's a big family.
Right. Well, and you mentioned Jonah Lena, Detective Jonah Lena, who is the other side of the spectrum. He's the hero, but he's a deeply flawed hero. He's a very tragic figure. So there are only shades of gray in your writing. Like nobody's one way or another.
Right.
And what I noticed with Detective Lena is he either cares almost too much or he cares not at all. It depends on the situation that he's in. He's able to bring out that empathy or shut it down when he has to, which I always thought was kind of fascinating in reading about him. So tell me a little bit about his own personal tragedy and how that informs, how he views the work that he has to do.
Yeah, well, Jonah is interesting because he came to us immediately as Lars Kepler came to us, and we knew the stories, and then Jonah was there as well, and he has changed from book to book. He never gives up. He always solves the cases, but it comes at a higher and higher cost. And
it's
this is surprising for us too.
Yeah, because he has this fear of losing his moral compass. He has this feeling of, for each case he solves, his soul is getting a bit darker. So he's afraid of end up on the other side to make the world a worse place.
Yeah.
So he's a complicated person, but as you say, he's full of empathy and he can do anything to save those he wants to save. But sometimes he's so hard, and that surprises himself. Actually.
And it surprises us as well.
Well, that's part of writing, is when the character really does come alive, and that's an interesting point that you brought up about him, because he, you look at him and he's, in conventional terms, he's always doing the right thing. He's trying to he's trying to stop the evil in the world. But at what point is he actually kind of addicted to that at the cost of his family or the things that are important to him that he's not really letting grow in his life? So that it does make him tragic, and it makes him compellingly readable, because you can kind of relate to him. You can kind of relate to like almost this obsession. And that's amazing, and he grows in every book, as we all do throughout the years as individual people. So it sounds like you've made him very human. But he's a fascinating character.
Yeah. To us as well. And what is so interesting is that we feel that we are kind of chasing him, trying to understand him, he has been living in this parallel world in Stockholm at the same time as we have been living here in Stockholm.
He's such an such an important person in our lives, but it's still an enigma.
Yeah,
As are all the important people in our lives.
probably.
There's a part of the book, and I don't really want to give away too much, but there's a part of the book where one of your characters by the name of Martin, we start to see that Martin is seeing almost these ghosts, he calls them the boys.
The boys, yes.
And these little kids in his mind are trying to torture him. And it was one of the creepiest things I've ever read. I mean, I'm reading this and I'm like, it was giving me chills. And I have a pretty high bar. I'm like, this is really messed up in a great way. So I want to know who's, I know you all have the same mind, but who came up with the boys and who got the fun experience of being able to write about them?
I think actually it was you.
I don't remember actually. But we always scare each other.
The boys, yes, it's exactly what we have to have. I think we both are kind of afraid of ghosts.
Yeah.
And Martin,
I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm afraid of them.
Yeah, and I am so afraid of ghosts. And I think our books are kind of in how do you say, twilight zone, where people also have ghost experience. It's not that there are ghosts, but we are so interested in psychic, the inner world of fear.
It's not it's not metaphysical. It's inner ghosts.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's what's fascinating about your book is that it doesn't quite cross the line, but it toes the line between metaphysical and just psychological. So, and that's always so fascinating. It's like how much of this is all happening in their minds, is all just the power of the psyche. So, somebody can read this book and see supernatural elements in it, but really it's about kind of the horrors of one's own mind, which I think is scarier than anything. And by the way, there are totally
that's the scary thing. That is the most scary thing.
The the subject matter of this book is exceptionally dark, and it deals with the abduction and enslavement of girls and women. What was the research part of this? I mean, this is a heavily researched book. You could feel it. And Alexandra, you've written historical fiction, so I imagine you're very good at research. What was the research like for this book, and how difficult was that to do?
Well, without spoiling anything, we did a lot of research about psychological disorders and state of minds and those kinds of. It's hard to say because then we will.
But of course, about the will of owning other people, to actually have another person. That's heavy research because it's a lot of real cases, and I think that's the only part I don't really like about writing is when you have to go into real cases and read about real victims and real suffering. You have to do it as a writer, but it's really, really hard. And the history is full of these stories.
People who want to own people, and that was the question we asked ourselves: why does this happen? And where comes this desire to have a total power over another person? Where does it come from? And
and I think there's a fascination in general with understanding the criminal mind, and there's a lot of popularity around that. And it all speaks to that element that you're talking about. Is like we can't understand it, but we want to try, because if you're naturally empathetic, you want to understand like what makes you think that way. But the exploring of that process through the research, I would think would be. You probably have to drink a lot when you write some of this stuff.
Well, take some breaks and.
But we wrote the Mirror Man. We had actually to walk away from our computers sometimes and just take a break.
This is too much.
We went out we have a balcony and we just stood there and rest in the
I have some-
fresh air.
have to get some air, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the power of a novel well written, right? Is that it's affecting you.
Yeah.
You've seen it so many times, and when you're writing it and you get
You are
physically
inside.
affected,
Yes.
Yeah.
you know you're doing something right in that case. And another thing that fascinated me about the book from an author's perspective when I was reading it was your pacing. So you would have a setup, but when there was something happening, it was a lot of one sentence paragraphs, which is kind of how I write as well. But I really saw it for the first time in terms of an effective pacing tool of like, wow, they're just pulling me through this, whether I want to go through it right now or not. I'm being pulled. Is that how much of that is conscious when you're writing of like, okay, let's have shorter chapters, or let's pick up the pace with shorter sentences? Do you think about that, or is it just the style
I
comes out?
think the rhythm goes
Yeah.
with the story in a way. I
Mhm.
think that it's natural.
We have never ever discussed that. It's just a feeling of the rhythm.
Yeah, it's like a pulse of the story. Now we need to.
It's the lyricism almost, right? Like you can feel the cadence of it of like, okay,
Yeah.
and then so I know probably some of that comes out in the editing process too, as you're reading it together and having a sense of like, do we need to change this, or are there not a lot of edits after you write?
Yeah, I know that you, Alexandra, you say often that when it becomes very exciting, we need to just look around a bit, and that is also a kind of a way of extending the moment
Yeah.
It's
a little bit.
It's a writer's thing. When things move fast in the story, you slow down the sentences. You have all the time in the world because you can make 1 second several pages, and it will. As a reader, you will feel it's so fast because you can notice everything, every teardrop or blood stain or whatever.
So I think it's kind of the I don't know, a feeling of the rhythm the story has to have in a way.
Yeah.
That we are, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a slow motion in a movie. You know, when it goes.
Sam Peckinpah.
Yeah, bum, 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 when you
Right.
everything slows down and you know this is fast.
And as you say, when you are dragged into the story, it's the same thing. Because we don't want to see, but we need to see, and that is the feeling I often get when I read these things.
I want to have a pillow.
Well, I mean, you know, from the bottom of my heart, it's a tremendous book, and I had such a pleasure reading it, and I could tell how much of your souls you put into your writing is very evident. Is there, I mean, with this book in particular, with The Mirror Man, is there something that it's important for you that readers take away, like one overall takeaway? Or when you're writing, are you just kind of writing for yourselves and not really even thinking about the audience so much?
We always try to write what we would love to read ourselves, because you can't please everybody.
Right, we know that. Yep.
So you have to, if you care for the story, care for the characters, and think you've done a good work, that's it.
And at the same time, I can feel that the only meaning of writing is that the book will find a reader that will like it, and that is kind of everything is meaningful if somebody actually got our letter.
Yeah.
A book is kind of a letter to the world.
Yeah, and I'm still surprised every time somebody says something kind about our books. And I'm so happy.
Because it's the meaning of everything. Suddenly we have shared the same word.
Yeah.
We have shared the same universe.
You have connected with millions of people, and that's such a tremendous accomplishment, and it was such a great pleasure to be able to talk to you today, and congratulations on the release of The Mirror Man. And I wanted to turn it to McKenna now so we can have other people ask you some questions as well.
Excellent. It has been a great chat, and we do have some questions. Thank you again, Carter, for doing this. Before we get to those questions, would you mind telling us about your forthcoming book?
Please.
Oh, sure. Thank you. Yeah, the upcoming book coming out in April is called The New Neighbor. And again, I don't outline, so I only thought of an opening scene, and I thought of a scene where a 30-year-old man is at his wife's funeral. She died unexpectedly, and at the funeral, he finds out that he won the lottery, millions and millions and millions of dollars. So it's about him kind of breaking from reality and taking his twins and moving to a new location and trying to start life anew after that.
Wow.
So it's fun.
Fun. It sounds
Yeah, good setup.
good setup. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so questions from the audience. I'm going to summarize this, but essentially, Kristen was wondering, how do you keep yourselves from having nightmares from your writing? Because your writing can be so dark and grisly.
Well,
Well, we do have nightmares. Actually, I have nightmares every time we write a book. In the middle of the process, I have terrible nightmares, and then they go away. But we have started to see the nightmares as a good sign that we are actually in contact with our true fear, and that we are in the story that moves us very much.
so from start, we were a bit worried when you had nightmares when we wrote The Hypnotist.
Yeah.
But nowadays, we just say, yes, we're on track.
Well, I appreciate that you suffer for our good reading.
Nightmares goes away. When Jonah Lena comes in and starts to understand the case, everything becomes good
It's
again.
better. That's fascinating. So Sarah, with whom you spoke yesterday, is watching, and she had a question. I think you've already touched on this a little bit, but do you two believe in ghosts, or do you find human evil scarier?
Well,
Human evil. Human
Hi,
evil.
Sarah. It was a great conversation yesterday.
No, I think
Yeah,
human
yeah.
evil is the most scary thing I know.
As we said, I don't believe in ghosts, but I'm really scared of them. But I'm more scared about human evil.
I think what scares me the most is the lack of mercy that people can show each other sometimes. I'm afraid of war. I don't know. I have never experienced war, but it's kind of what scares me the most. When people stop seeing each other as persons. As humans.
Yeah, fair enough. How about you, Carter? Do you believe in ghosts?
I 100% believe in ghosts. I've had encounters with ghosts, and it was pretty awesome. But yes, I never did believe until I had an experience, and I'm like, yeah, they're real.
But they are not so scary as people.
No,
No.
totally.
Yeah. Okay, another question. This one from Hillary. What authors do you love to read, and what have you read recently that has brought you joy? So let's start with you, Alexandra.
Oh, good question. I am such a big reader. I read all the time. Reading is just as important to me as writing, and I have been also teaching literature at the university in Stockholm, and I have been a critic for many, many years. So it's really hard to pick up one writer and say this one, because for me, I read everything, and it depends on how I feel. And me and Alexandra have a book discussion club together.
For two.
Yeah, just us, the two of us. And we started last year, and
So we always buy 2 copies of each book.
yeah, and it's a way for us to make more place for reading
Pleasure
in our lives. So
it's hard to pick. But
I love historical fiction. I
Hilary
love
Mantel.
Hilary Mantel, an English writer. She wrote about Wolf Hall. And I love Gillian Flynn. Everything about Gillian Flynn I love. And so I am, reading everything. I love Emily Dickinson.
So we read actually everything from classics and poetry to new crime fiction, of course. So.
And in our book discussion club, we read everything. Right
now, Joyce.
Oh, nice.
So, well, I think writing and reading depends on each other. I think our school to become author has been being readers, actually.
Makes sense. How about you, Carter? Anything you've read and loved recently, or any all-time favorites?
I read this book called The Mirror Man by Lars Kepler. I don't know if you've heard of him.
That's
It was amazing.
fun.
That is one of the most recent books that I read. I will also have a shout out for Stephen King's latest, Billy Summers, which is one of the best ones I've read of him, probably since 11/22/63. So it's
Wonderful.
fantastic. And it's just kind of just crime fiction and nothing supernatural. Yeah, it's great.
Thank you for the tips. We
Yeah.
will read it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We will, of course, read your books. They're not in Swedish. We know that you're translated a lot, but not to Swedish.
Not yet. Fingers crossed.
But now we will read it in English, of course,
Yes.
when we met you.
Looking forward.
Okay, our final question is one from Susan. I always like to end on this, or she has a variety along this line. So, what writers, living or dead, would you like to meet? And Carter, I'm going to put you in the hot seat to start with.
Oh, I wouldn't mind having a drink with Neil Gaiman. I think that would be. I think he would be a tremendous person to hang out with. He just seems like a very original guy and a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. I
Yeah.
agree. We are so bad at these.
Kafka. No, kidding.
Well, I would love to talk to Joyce Carol Oates. I would love to see her and ask her about Blonde, which is a great novel, I think. I loved.
I would love to meet Shakespeare, of course, William Shakespeare, because he seems to be a lot of fun.
Good sense of humor. Okay, I think that does it. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Carter, for conducting such a great talk. And the two of you, Lars Kepler, I'm a big fan of this series, and you guys just keep delivering. So congrats on Mirror Man. And Carter, hopefully we'll be talking with you at some point in April.
Yes.
That would be great. Guys, congratulations again.
Thank you. And thank you so much for your great questions.
That was fun. My pleasure.
It was fun.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to sign us all off. Cheers, everyone. Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you watching as well. Bye.